Thank you guys for joining us at Church Online. If you need prayer, we would love to pray for you. Please just press the contact button and then I need prayer, and we would love to pray for you. If you would like to partner with us financially, please just click the giving button. If you'd like the sermon notes to follow along with today's message, please download our app. You can do that by texting Vision AZ app to the number 77977. This app will allow you to follow along with the teaching. It'll give you the calendar of events. There is so much information on this app. Please check it out today. If you are ever in Tucson visiting, please come by and check out Vision Church on any given weekend. We have 3 services. Now here's today's message.
All right, I guess I'm on. That was blueberry pie, by the way, of course, in case you didn't know. It's a little bit dangerous for me to get into math and do pie charts. Please don't let Terry Webb know that I did that. She's out of town right now. She might check my math and go, But actually, one thing I can elaborate on a little bit, that 7%, a little misrepresented because it doesn't include all the special events that we do, Project Overwhelm for beds or houses or goats that you guys bring in. Actually, through what you guys are giving, we are able to do quite a bit more than what the pie represents. So that's really cool. But when it comes to math, yeah, it's a little bit dangerous for me to be out doing this kind of thing. You know, you come into junior high in 9th grade to get into out of the arithmetic into the algebra, geometry, that x plus y equals z kind of thing. I remember I was hanging in there through geometry, and then, you know, that was, some of you probably took trigonometry or calculus, and God bless you. But today we're going to talk about something that I think will be really helpful, and we're going to use little math, little simple algebra that I think all of us can relate to, and hopefully learn something that's really helpful, both in our life and also to help us to equip other people. So I'm anxious about that. This is a truck that you probably won't see on Cortero, the back of the Ford F-150 that has has both of these bumper stickers on it. On the one side, it has the classic "Stuff Happens." I cleaned that up a little bit for church. Or on the other side, "Everything happens for a reason." If you followed this truck or had to sit behind it at the stoplight, trying to get underneath the freeway, you'd look at that and go, how can it be both? Does stuff happen, or does everything happen for a reason? Which is it? And yet, in our conversations, in our culture, in our co-workers and neighbors, or us as well, we may throw out either one depending on the situation. I can't figure out the reason for this or why it happened, therefore we just kind of go, well, stuff happens. But sometimes, or often, it's a lot more positive to think, no matter what happens, and you've heard it said, or I've said it myself, or you have, I know everything happens for a reason, so, and we kind of carry those two philosophies around with us all the time. I've used this reference so much, no apologies, I probably will use it again, but in the movie of Forrest Gump, and if you're a lot younger than me, you're going, what? Yeah, I've kind of heard of that movie, but most of us my age are a little younger. Pretty iconic movie where we watch Forrest come through elementary school being chased by the bullies to high school where he learned to run the ball. The military, becoming an Olympic champion, ping pong player, all of that stuff that he did, a millionaire, famous on magazine covers, but he also suffered all the losses in his life. 2 hours and 22 minutes, we watched this movie where he did eventually lose Bubba, he lost Mama, and he even lost Jenny in the end. So we've seen Forrest Gump kind of wander through this story trying to figure out these two things. Now, Mama says we all have a destiny. We should find our destiny. But Lieutenant Dan says, no, it's like a feather blowing in the wind. It's just stuff happens. Which is it? He's standing in front of Jenny's grave at the end of the movie going, you know, and he kind of turns this phrase up at the end. He goes, maybe it's both. And I used to kind of preach that going, you know, it can't be both, or that movie shows the futility of Hollywood's view of blah, 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 yada, yada, and what preachers do. But the truth is, it is a great question. Could it be both? Because a lot of us walk around and we do subscribe to both. Well, this seems like just stuff just happens, but that over there seems like everything happens for a reason. The reason I want us to talk about this is because I believe leaving this sort of gray and fuzzy and confusing can lead to a lot of frustration and anger, and it's often directed toward God. If something happens and it's painful and we really can't figure it out, it's frustrating. And I really believe that this issue, it kind of falls into that why bad things happen to good people and type of thing, can be the number one reason why people just finally give up on God. They were good with God until this happened, and I can't figure out the reason. Or if there is a reason for it, it kind of makes me mad that it happened anyway. I don't care what the reason is. I didn't want to lose my loved one. I didn't want to go through this hard time. Or it can be the reason other people say, I don't really want anything to do with God in the first place. There's a misunderstanding. If God allows this to happen, if God allows 40,000 people in Africa, children to die every day, then I don't want to serve that kind of God. So it's good for us to talk about it, both to get a grip of it of ourselves, but also to maybe help some others who might be going through a hard time. We can come along beside them and kind of help them and encourage them if we are more focused on which is it. Does everything happen for a reason, or does stuff just happen? So what we're going to do is look at a pretty famous, cool story. I've taught on this a number of times. The story when Jesus goes to Bethany and raises Lazarus up from the dead. Lazarus, Mary, and Martha were kind of like Jesus' personal friends. Jesus loved everybody, but he traveled a lot, saw a lot of strangers. When he had a little time off, Jesus just liked to go to Bethany and hang out with Mary and Martha and Lazarus, his personal friends. And so that's kind of the context of this story, where it says, now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. Jesus is up in Galilee somewhere, just kind of keeping a low profile right now because things were heating up in Jerusalem. Toward the end of his ministry, he knew that he had to be careful about not getting into the judicial system too quick and being executed before he was ready. My time has not yet come. So he was up in Galilee. He gets word. This, I believe, indicates pretty strongly Jesus didn't know. Somebody might interpret this story because Jesus does have a purpose for all of this, or he brings a purpose into it. Some people may actually think this was God's plan to cause Lazarus to be sick, that Jesus had something to do with him getting sick in the first place. But it says that Mary sent word to Jesus. And it said when he heard this news for Jesus, he said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that the Son of Man God's Son may be glorified through it. Here's what I want us to see, and we can apply this, encouraging already. When we go through a hard time, even if we haven't, at this point Lazarus is still alive, most likely. They're sending word to Jesus, letting you know a bad thing is cooking up, is about to happen. Jesus already begins to make a plan for this bad thing to bring something good. He's telling his disciples, he's explaining to the disciples, this sickness will not end in death. Let me tell you, I have a plan. I'm going to bring something good from this bad thing. When we begin to enter in, even bad things we're going through now and they haven't really worked out yet, or stuff we don't even know about, that God knows about, that we're going to go through this storm and this hard time or this pain or this sorrow or this loss, God is of the character. He says, I already have a plan to make something good come from this bad thing that we are going through. So we see that in the story. And it says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. He clearly loved them, but he stayed where he was for 2 more days and then said to his disciples, okay, now let us go back to Judea. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. And later on, Mary said the same thing. When Mary saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Then they moved more toward where the tomb is, where Lazarus is buried. And Mary and Martha and all the people, family and friends gathered there. They're just having a breakdown there. When Jesus saw them all weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and he was troubled. And Jesus wept too. Then the Jews said, look how much he loved him. But it only took just a little bit for them to begin to murmur, maybe some of the same questions you and I would have had. Some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man? This is confusing. I don't get this. I thought this was Jesus' friend. Could not he have shown up and saved his friend? And so that's kind of the story, how it lays out. And indeed, Jesus did go forward and raise Lazarus from the dead. You can read that in John chapter 11. I encourage you to do so. I'm kind of cherry picking the verses here to make it more of a flowing story. So it's good for us to go back and read it. But some things that we can see within this story. First of all, what I said, it just doesn't add up. Jesus was known to be somebody who loved Lazarus and Mary and Martha. He loved these people, personal friends. Jesus was also known to be somebody who healed, took care of people he didn't even know, strangers. Why wouldn't he show up then immediately and go, I got to go save Lazarus and get them out of this sorrowful, painful experience? Sometimes we can get, in our personal relationship with God, we really do kind of live with that expectation, even though all the billions of people that have ever lived on the earth, ever in life, have suffered pain, suffering, illness, loss. When it comes to us, we're like, hey, what's the deal? I'm hurting here. I expect you. Mary and Martha both said to him, if you'd only been here, where were you? Our brother wouldn't have died. I think all of us, that's sort of an instinctive thing we have, even though it makes no logical sense, that while every human that's ever lived has suffered pain, and if it's been before us, has even gone into death, that we would go, but I don't have to do that, do I? God, that's not the way life should be. You're my God. I follow you. I believe in Jesus. I got baptized. I'm a Christian. Everything should be rosy from now on. And if it's not, I'm kind of upset about it. So we have to admit that sometimes we feel this way as well. The other thing that we see that I think is really interesting is that this bad situation that Jesus comes into, Mary and Martha already has looked at Lazarus, maybe getting kind of pale, losing weight, recognizing this isn't good. Something bad is about to happen. This is bad. And they send word to Jesus. I kind of picture Jesus and God. We have to use our imagination, having a conversation. Like when they created all of this, heaven and earth perfectly and humanity perfectly, Adam and Eve perfect in the garden. No aging, no pain, no death, nothing like that. And they look down and they see sin enter the picture. And they kind of look at each other and say, this is bad. Now all of our children that we love so much, because sin has come into it, is going to cause pain and sorrow and death. This is bad. When I was a kid, the first funeral that I ever remember going to was my grandma's funeral when I was about junior high. Now, I love my grandma and I know she loved me, but we had like 1,000 grandkids in Bangor, Michigan, so I was just part of the pack. I wasn't especially close with my grandma, is what I'm saying. So I think at the funeral, I was kind of looking around going, so this is what a funeral's like. I see all my cousins there, probably wondering if there's cookies afterwards, as deep as I was as a kid. But I have to admit, it wasn't a particularly emotional experience for me just because I was sort of caught up in the experience. And then I looked over. I have a cousin that was a few years older than me, tough kid. motorcycles. That was the 60s when guys were wearing colors on their back. He'd already had a few brushes with the law, some drugs involved in his life. And I looked over at him, his eyes are all wet. And this tough kid had a tear coming down his cheek. And when I saw my cousin Steve, I lost it. I wasn't crying for my grandma because I believed and knew that she was in a better place. But when I saw my cousin Steve, this tough kid that I grew up with, crying, I cried really, really hard. I think that's what's going on with Jesus. We read this scripture where it says Jesus wept. Jesus knew he was going to raise Lazarus back up in a minute or two, and that there'd be incredible celebration and joy. He wasn't crying for Lazarus. Wouldn't seem to make sense. Wouldn't seem to make sense that he was crying for Mary or Martha because they were getting ready to be really, really happy too. So why was Jesus crying? I'm going to suggest to him he was kind of looking at humanity going, this is bad. And I'm reminded that when we created this world and these children, we never intended for them to have this kind of pain and this kind of suffering. And yet, because sin is in the world, it's reminding me, Jesus in his human body bringing up emotion, that even Jesus cried. It's a good perspective for us to have that kind of thing. So we want to take this story and go back to our original bumper stickers and ask those two questions. Or even in the story of Lazarus, which was it? Did Lazarus get sick and die because, well, stuff happens? Or did he get sick and die because everything happens for a reason? Which is it? We can apply that. I think we can learn a lot through this. The two perspectives. First of all, when we go through bad times, stuff, you put the label on it. Some of you are going through bad times right now. You're in a season where you're concerned about somebody and for yourself. There's pain in your life. There's suffering in your life right now. We tend to think in our perspective, God, why is this happening? Where are you? If only you'd come in, I wouldn't have lost my child, my spouse, my loved one, my grandma, whatever it is. We tend to do that. And I don't think God, he knows that we're like this. Mary and Martha were so direct. The other people are going, man, it seems like he would have come along and helped Lazarus. But Mary and Martha just go straight to Jesus and go, where were you? If you'd have been here, they confront him. The people closest to the pain will just cry out to God like, hey! And I think God really accepts that. He'd rather have us be very honest about that. But from God's perspective, Jesus wept at the gravesite. I believe when we go through hard times and stuff happens, his message to us is, I'm sorry. You're not alone. You may feel alone. I hear you. I never intended in the original creation for you to have to go through this pain and suffering. My son and I have still devised a wonderful salvation plan so that this can end in life. All these things are true. But here's the thing. You got to trust me. Mary and Martha, I know you're kind of mad at me right now, but you still have to trust me. Jesus asked them, do you believe? Did I read that one, Richard, or did I skip that one? Can you jump back to that? I'm testing him now. I think I jumped off the story. Last scripture verse in the John 11, and there it is. He's pointing at me going, hey, dummy, it's on the screen. Jesus said to her, I'm the resurrection and life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. He's assuring her. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. And then he asks them, Mary, he's responding to Mary, do you believe this? Mary says, yes, Lord. I mean, it is true. I'm confused. I'm hurt. I'm angry. I still don't know why you didn't show up when I wanted you to show up, but I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God. That's non-negotiable. So then they took away the stone, and Jesus looked up and said, an interesting thing, he prays to his Father. I think it was kind of a loud prayer at first and then maybe a quiet prayer in the middle. He says, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And then looks up at God and says, I knew that you always hear me. But I said that for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. We begin to see the reason come into Jesus' choice to allow or not to rush in and save Lazarus, so that people will believe that you sent me. So even though there's anger there sometimes, the perspective, God says, trust me. I know you don't feel like it right now, but trust me, and I will bring you through this. So let's go back to our math equation. We can begin to fill in some of the missing pieces. I loved it when my algebra teacher began to go, we'll give you a couple of these, and you just have to figure out what the x is. What's the x factor? First of all, in our equation today, the y stands for you and I, or more specifically, the stuff that happens to you and I, because it happens to all of us. That's the y. Let's get our remainder. Our answer is what we really want is if I have to go through this, I want there to be a reason. And even from the very beginning when I go through pain, because I do believe in Romans 8:28, God causes all things to work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. I have answered that call. Now, God, I'm looking for the reason. What is the reason? There should be life in this, or healing, or equipping, or some sort of meaning. What is it? That's the answer we want. The only thing we don't yet have is then what does X have to be? If everything happens for a reason, then X has to be our belief, our faith, and our trust. And unfortunately, that's the first thing that goes when we follow God all of our life. I followed you, God, until I got hurt so bad in life that I got mad at you, which God's saying, I'm crying right along with you. I never wanted you to go through this. And we say, you know what? If there's this much pain in life, I'm holding you responsible, and I quit. And when we do that, we can never get to the reason, the healing, the life, not because of something God did, because of something that we did. Someday, if I make my trip to the Holy Land, like many pastors do, I probably won't ever do that, but I'd like to. It'd be awesome to walk in the places where Jesus walked. I've never heard of anybody actually taking a trip to Bethany, though, and I wonder why, because that's one of the first places I would go. Take that little 12-mile jaunt over to Bethany. You know what I'd do? I'd go to Lazarus' house. Ding dong. And go, is Lazarus here? I'd really love to talk to him about this experience. You say that's kind of crazy. He would be 2,000 years old at this point. But then it makes me think, if Jesus came along and he was dead and raised him back up, why did he do that? Because Lazarus was just going to die again. Let's say Lazarus died from the same disease that he had at this point in our story. And 30 years later, he's going, you know, it really hurt the first time. I don't really appreciate so much that I have to go through this again. I would have just assumed that you left me where I was. I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm married to a sugar mama. And she happens to work for a company that owns resorts, or the parent company that owns the place where she works. And last year, she won a trip to St. Kitts. And she took me along. I started being real nice to her as soon as she won the contest. So I have a sugar mama, and we were in St. Kitts last fall. It was really awesome. And I have to admit, after our time there, when it was time to pack up, I was kind of like, you know, I could stand to stay here a little bit longer. I wonder about Lazarus, and we have to think about this. I think it's fun to think about. Being in paradise, leaving this world, the trappings of this world, we have to use our imagination again, but being with God for 4 days in paradise, and then hearing that call, Lazarus, come forth. He's like, seriously? I would just as soon stay here. Come back into a cold, dark tomb, kind of become aware with this stuff. It says when he came out, they had to unwrap him like why did you call me back here? I was really in a cool place. So we have to come to the conclusion that Jesus didn't bring Lazarus back for Lazarus. It wasn't for him. It really wasn't even for Mary and Martha. They were joyful in the moment, but after a while, life goes on and you get back to real life, and I'm sure they loved each other, but that big celebration sort of... So it wasn't for Lazarus that he did this. But Jesus made it known right from the beginning. They said, hey, you're the one you love is sick. He's going to die. And Jesus said, there's a purpose. There's a meaning. There's a reason for this. And I'll see it through to the end as long as Mary and Martha, you are faithful in this. And that's exactly what Jesus did. And the fruit that came of that is absolutely unmeasurable. If you read a little bit further on in John chapter 12, pretty famous story about Jesus coming into Jerusalem. It's known as the triumphal entry. This is when thousands of people lined the streets. It was the pinnacle of people believing in Jesus, at least up until the day of Pentecost. They were throwing palm leaves down in front of him. It fulfilled prophecy because the prophet said that Jesus would come riding into Jerusalem as a king, only he'd be riding on a little donkey. That's exactly what happened that day. And that whole thing was set up because the people had heard that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. They were so excited about that story, it spread everywhere. It caused thousands and thousands of people to line the street and recognize Jesus as the Son of God. Mary and Martha said, where were you? Why weren't you here? If you'd been here, my brother would not have had to die. Jesus said, this will end in life. This will end in something good. Watch and see. I'll show you. And he does the same thing with us. When we go through crisis, we pray, God, just like Jesus prayed in the garden, I really would love to be delivered from this, but even if I'm not delivered from this, your will be done, not mine, because I know you got a plan. I know you're going to bring something really good out of this. I have some friends that... let's answer our equation first of all. So here's how the whole thing runs. Here's a summation. We all live in a fallen world where stuff happens. I mean, we just do. It happens to everybody. But if we believe and trust God, then we can hold on to, yes, everything happens for a reason, because my faith and my trust is in God, who can actually make things, push the puzzle pieces around and make things happen for the good. We don't have the trust, then everything happens for a reason really doesn't go any further than the bumper sticker. My friends, years ago, beautiful couple discovered that their little one had cancer. I mean, when I think of these kind of teachings, I think of probably the scenario that would be most challenging would be for a parent to face the reality of losing a child. And that's exactly the situation that they were in. Now, this was years ago. I was a fairly new pastor, and we all did our best to walk through it with them. Lots of family members involved, and it was such a bewildering, awful thing to watch. This beautiful couple lost their firstborn to cancer. Years ago. How long ago was it, Nick? What was it? Almost 20 years ago. I can't tell you all the steps, but that would be a classic situation. God, where were you? Why? If only you would have. And of course, those emotions are real and appropriate at that time. What has happened since that? She did pass away as an infant. From that, family members have come to know God, built their faith, stepped into it, learning to pray through that. One in particular became a pastor, started a church. He was never on that road before. Now we can look back and see that sad, awful reality of life. God didn't cause her to have cancer. She lives in a fallen world. Even babies get cancer, and she died. Today there's a pastor, at least one piece of fruit that we can see. There's a pastor on the south side leading a church, leading hundreds and hundreds of people to know Christ. Just one example. He's been faithful. God has shown amazingly good things to come from that terrible, terrible, awful thing that happened 20 years ago. As we go through things, we really are called, first of all, to recognize whether we have put our faith and our trust in God in the first place. Something, a definitive thing that we decide to do. We have gone through tough times. We will go through tough times. The choice is, will we face the things to come, being a solid, defined believer in God and Jesus Christ? There is a point where we need to make that decision, that statement, that proclamation. And we love to give you the opportunity to follow that through with baptism, which Graham mentioned in the video. New Testament, we always see people step into the water and get baptized, so those things we kind of group together. If you have any questions about what that means, to simply put my belief and trust in God, have any questions, we can email each other, write it on your vision card, drop it in, talk to me afterwards. Or, as Graham said in the video, if you're ready, we're ready. If you want to get baptized, we're doing baptism Sunday next week. I promise the water will be warm. It's going to be kind of a cool setting out there. But this is really where it begins. We want everything to happen for a reason, for God to bring good of everything that happens to us. The first thing that we need to do, as Mary and Martha did, is put our belief and trust in God in a non-negotiable way. No matter what we go through, it doesn't shake my belief and my faith in God. That's the kind of trust we have. Secondly, we're called to help others. I realize this weekend I'm talking to a lot of people who have already made that decision to give their life to God. We need to become equipped so that we can help others walk through the tough times that they go through. Does everything happen for a reason? Yes. If you put your faith and your trust in our Creator and our Father who loves us, everything does happen for a reason. Something good will come of this. There's an appropriate time to help people realize that when they're going through hard times. Those two things, hope it's been helpful. It's good for us to look at even this kind of tough question. Let's go ahead and pray together. God, thank you for our time. Just thank you so much that you are in our life. You're with us every moment. You're with whatever all of us are going through right now, the challenges. Some of it's heavy for us. Maybe we're in a time right now of relief where things are sailing along pretty good, but we know in life stuff comes along. Thank you that you not only care about that, but you care deeply about it. I pray that we'll learn more and more just to keep trusting. Our sight is so limited, we can see very little ahead of us or the strategy from your perspective. Help us just to trust you and know you'll bring us through to something good for a reason for everything we go through. Man, that's a lot to be thankful for, and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you guys for coming. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.